first, we're going to hear back from the session, the performance metrics, Rebecca Flora.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there. We've had some great discussions this afternoon. We led, and I want to say we, because we had a whole team of 12 facilitators that were all part of the development of the Pittsburgh performance measures, and I think we have a slide coming up soon. In any event, we had tables broken out to really begin to introduce people to the P4 performance measures, and first really tell them a little bit about what they are, in case you haven't heard of them. Basically, what we've produced over the last year of working together with a team of over 100 people developed basically a set of 12 measures that we will be using in the city to help evaluate development projects in the city. And the 12 different measures have within them metrics that are providing quantitative ways for us to essentially determine, well, you know, how do we evaluate air quality in a development project, or how do we have a common language for how we think about these different top issues in the area. And so those measures are in a full document that was released earlier this year, not this year, last week. And the mayor made a pretty astounding announcement that the city would be using those performance measures and in evaluating projects. We anticipate those to actually be put into use by January. And over the next couple of months, we have to figure out all the systems that need to be in place around those measures to ensure that the delivery system works, and that all of the templates and what kind of training do we need to do, and what kind of policies might need to change that might be in the way and create barriers. I mean, all of those types of issues. So we're really just getting started with the performance measures, and I am just simply here really as the person that facilitated and helped bring it together. Because there were so many other people involved. This really was something that was developed by the people of Pittsburgh for Pittsburgh, and I really want to make sure we recognize those folks. So anybody that was part of the performance measures team out there over the last year in some way, shape, or form or another, please stand up. Thank you. Thank you all. We couldn't have done it without all of the people that were involved. So now that we have some slides up for me and you know a little bit about the performance measures, I'm going to share with you what we did in our session. Presented them first, but really interestingly, what we did to sort of give people a chance to start kind of, you know, sticking their toe in the water, understanding. We had a table set up for each and every one of the 12 measures. We had subject matter expert facilitators at each of those tables who basically then worked the table through a scenario, a project scenario, to determine how would that project score using the air measure at the air table or the rainwater measure at the rainwater table. So each table came back with a group score for that project based on the scenario that they were given. And that score, as you can see, nice project, not too bad. Score is a 10-point basis on each of the different measures. And you can see it was a little low on opportunity, really high on community, high on public. But just it was really more just to sort of get people using these measures. The next part of this exercise that we did, the second exercise, is really pretty interesting. And it's the one that is most valuable to us as we continue with this performance measures work that we're doing. And that really tells it all. We asked the groups to each, within their measure, to identify where we think Pittsburgh is now as a baseline for that measure that they were working on at their table. And you can see that the highest ones were around land and connect, both around 5. The economy table couldn't quite come together to figure out where we were in economy. I think it's partly because we use a particular metric that's a little difficult. But sadly, air, opportunity, community, really low scoring. And that was a group sitting around a table trying to determine where we think we are now. The next thing I asked them to do, and actually I raised the bar from 3 to 5 years, we asked them, where would we like to be in 5 years? And realistically, where could we be in 5 years if we were using this evaluation method to begin to assess? And we heard about that that 500 acres of development that's out there, we started to applying it to all the development in the city. Where could we be in 5 years? Very interestingly, there were people think big. They said, we want to be at 10 and we think we can do it in 5 years. Love it. The lowest score in here was around air and energy in terms of, the increment that we need to get to. And it was just, the table's discussing in a very short time frame, but I think it begins to give us a little bit of a sense of where we're at, where we could be, and how this new tool that we have could help us get there. And that was pretty much what we did. And then I asked them one final question. I said, how could your measure help advance and improve the lives of disadvantaged populations? And we had them write that all down on a card, and just a couple of quick things, because I know we need to move on with the report out. But not surprisingly, if people have poor air quality and they have asthma, it's really hard to study in school and to do well in school. It's really hard to do well in the workplace. And so air, clearly more attention to air makes a big difference. Energy, if we can lower energy and utility bills, that means that there's more money available in people's household incomes to be able to use in other ways. And those are just a couple of examples. Design crossed over with community, clearly, because to the extent that we really think about creating places for community to come together. The innovation table was pretty interesting. The innovation table said transformative projects remove barriers. And so we have an innovation measure, and we feel like that could really help in those areas. I don't have time to read off all of them, but we have them collected, and we think there was some very, very good information that came out of this session. And thank you for letting us share it, and thank you to all the facilitators and everyone involved with us working through this session. Thank you.
See, this is what happens when you bring sharp minds together to think about some of these challenges that we have. All right, so the next group, Richard Obermeyer and his team, featuring Scott and Christy, to talk about the Pittsburgh 2025 session.
Hello, everyone. So next slide. So in our session, Pittsburgh 2025, a new vision for growth. You have the clicker. There were kind of 4 areas that we talked about. We broke our teams. We had 150 people participating. We had 4 general areas that you see here: equity, inclusion, growing, retaining, attracting firms, looking at placemaking, quality of life, and infrastructure and systems. So again, 150 people, and then under each one of these, we had other ideas. So there were about 12 different table topics that we worked on, came up with over 60 prioritized ideas that are very actionable. We're not developing a report on this. We're trying to move forward with it. So I'll turn it over.
All right, so the process for getting there, we had anywhere from 4, 6, 8 people sitting at each table. Each table had a question that was very focused. How might we? How might we welcome diverse peoples to Pittsburgh? How might we help startup businesses grow and hire and provide employment? And the people at the table discussed that question, discussed all what they were already doing around that question, and then also went in to do a matrix, similar to many of the other sessions, where they were trying to come up with lots of ideas, and then those ideas were rolled up through voting into specific cards for actionable ideas.
Got one.
Got one.
So, as we said, we had a number of ideas. We just had an overwhelming number of ideas to pick from, so we just grabbed a few. So Rich and I will go through these. So first, we had an idea about making Pittsburgh the world center for autonomy. So we obviously know that with Uber's driverless cars being tested here and CMU's great skill set, that this is an area of excellence, but how do we build this into a core economic function of the city? So the idea was, how do you create these wraparound services around legal, intellectual property, management, manufacturing? How do we actually manufacture these things here and provide huge numbers of jobs? Finance, regulatory, climate, really make Pittsburgh the global place where you do everything related to autonomy.
And then the next area, one of the other areas that we heard as a recommended idea is really developing new success narratives, really looking at, talking to the community about different measures and metrics in terms of what does success look like, and trying to help students think about success. Part of that is around life planning skills and programs. So across the board, we thought about the 4 Ps. So obviously you heard a couple around sort of the place and the people and the placemaking type of activity. And so we covered all those as part of it, and these are just a couple examples. So thanks.
And then the last one, I think we had some technical difficulties uploading it, so I'll just tell you. So there's a lot of talk about entrepreneurship, obviously, in our group around innovation. And so a idea that was floated was, how do we get startups that are past maybe the first level and need to get to the second level of getting their first customers, test bedding ideas. So the idea emerged of creating an Innovation Works 2.0. Innovation Works is the entrepreneurial accelerator program here in Pittsburgh. And so that's world famous. So how do we take that for young startups and build up the ladder so we start employing people in the entrepreneurial sector?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, our session on creating housing opportunity and building mixed income neighborhoods. This is a challenge for Pittsburgh and a lot of cities, and we put some other sharp people on that. We're going to hear from Matt Barron from the Hines Endowments and Nate Bishop from Maya Design.
Hello. So we had a great session looking at the topic of affordable housing and mixed income communities. Obviously, an incredibly important topic both in Pittsburgh and around the country right now. We had a great panel with Mercedes Marquez, Angela Blanchard, who spoke earlier today, and Celeste Scott, an affordable housing organizer with Pittsburgh United. And we really wanted to look at, what are those things other than housing that make a strong mixed income community? So we had our groups pose an initial question of what would affordable housing in a just Pittsburgh look like? And what were those other services and other amenities and other sort of neighborhood things that needed to be wrapped around that to make it work? We had some great conversation. We generated over 400 ideas of what that might look like. And then we moved into a creative matrix session that Nate will talk a little bit about.
Yeah, so we, to carve out a few areas of focus for generating those ideas, we came up with the 3 challenge questions of how might we protect communities from displacement, how might we ensure healthy, accessible housing for those who need it, and how might we give citizens more of a voice in the development process. And then thinking of those 3 questions as enablers, we used planning, policy, transportation, and economic development so that we could focus on how the intersection of those questions and those enablers rather than just try to come up with the golden ticket that solves it all. Through that, we had, I think, 14 tables with about 7 people each, and in that round, it came up with another, I think each table had, I don't remember the math exactly, but came up to around 500 different ideas in a 15-minute creative matrix session. So everyone was awesomely engaged and a bunch of lively conversation that we're going to capture some of those details later and do some synthesis.
Yep, thank you to everyone who participated. We had council members, developers, community activists, a really diverse and just robust discussion. Thank you.
All right, we have 2 sessions left to report out on. This one, I don't have my notes. This one, next session is, the slides still aren't up. But anyway, it's Paul and Phil, and they're going to report out on what happened in their session on the most livable city and wrestling with the challenges of environmental and public health. Phil and Paul.
Boy, was this one interesting. This is a really large-scale challenge with many, many facets and dimensions to consider. Air, water, transportation, economy, many different dimensions. And we were prompted, with the subject matter experts in the room, Phil included, to think about some of the things that everybody heard in the earlier sessions today. Things like, as we're trying to generate solutions, how do we think personally about this? How do we think about things that are truly transformative? How do we think about things that are new that we haven't tried yet before? How do we work at the intersections of organizations and other entities that normally don't work together? So after we worked our way through the activities, we ended up, I think, bubbling up 3 very different clear areas of gravity and focus that were about really practical ways for how to accomplish achieving healthy and safe environments and healthy and safe communities. So Phil, what did we end up with?
We were able to pull this down to about 3 different categories. The first was meaningful design. How can we purposefully, meaningfully design our environment to reduce the potential for impacts? And some examples are walking and biking access to parks, and smarter transit and integrated transit options that encourage and give space to the pedestrian, for example, as well as a deeper level of investment in the built environment so that we can have smart transportation, traffic signalization, areas for people to be outside to get to and from work and school. Our second category that we reached was generally referring to what folks called actual community representation. This would be authentic and real community participation in all the important things that our societies do to manage our environmental and health affairs. Examples include, this one was great, including kids in planning and decision-making that our communities engage in. More town hall meetings to discuss environmental justice and sustainability. Community representation in negotiations, in regulatory negotiations when enforcing permits for air quality and water quality performance. And then the third final category that really pulled together a lot of different themes and thoughts gets to the people plugging into our future. There are a lot of great ideas here, including, for example, jobs training in the region for sustainable energy and manufacturing. The economy around remediation. There are a lot of homes, for example, in schools that could be, we could eliminate toxic hazards from these environments. And these are actually, this is a whole sector of employment. Another one was thinking about children and making their environments, whether it be in their schools or their playgrounds, toxic-free and safe. And then engaging children in activities which really give them a sense of meaning and purpose as it relates to the environment. And one example was a summer camp around the theme of air quality. So those were our 3 categories that we worked toward.
Thank you.
See, if I would have had my Bobby Brown TED Talk ready, I wouldn't have stumbled in that last one. All right, so the final report out today is from the Pittsburghs Creatives and their role in P4. And this one, for me, has an important, it resonates with me I'm not going to spend too much time with this. About 10 years ago, I spent some time with a delegation from China. They came to Penn State, and they were concerned about the Chinese, like a lot of Asian countries, had spent decades investing in STEM. And they wanted to catch up with the West. And what they missed was, by neglecting arts, they had no creative people in their society. They had neglected nurturing that part of the society. And so as a result, they weren't innovating anything. They had this tremendous machine that could produce. They had the people, but they couldn't innovate. They couldn't create anything. We can't afford to forget how important this is, that creative element. And so for this one, Janet and Megan are going to report out from that session. But this piece here about the role of the creatives, we can't drop that piece. I think Janet and Megan are coming out. Yep, they're ready.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Janet Sarbaugh from the Heinz Endowments. I want to thank you for sticking with us, and I want to tell you a little bit about Pittsburgh's Creative session. We had the good fortune of having a room of very smart leaders in the cultural sector, and we went from soup to nuts on what the connections are between the P4 principles, all aspects of P4 that we heard today, and Pittsburgh's creative community, all the way from human development to community revitalization to the built environment. And I want to give a special shout out to the three panelists that presented today: Julie Malice from Boom Concepts in Garfield, Janira Solomon from KST in East Liberty, and Bonnie Young-Lang from the Hill Consensus Group in the Hill District. I think their work really exemplified the kind of work that we want to see done in neighborhoods in Pittsburgh where culture is ubiquitous and part of the positive story of neighborhoods.
I'm Megan Guidi, and I'm from Maya Design. And some very interesting things came up in our session. We started off with great information from our panelists who talked to us about three big concepts that really helped to inspire our groups as we worked through the brainstorming activities. The first idea was around placekeeping and the notion of making sure that we're creating spaces in our communities that not only are a space, but are appropriate to the legacy of the arts in that area. The next idea was really around placemaking. So it was about creating spaces for artists to be in and making sure that those artists have the resources to be there. And lastly, we heard from the Kelly Strayhorn Theater, and they had this great idea where they call themselves an organization of yes. And they're trying to say yes to as many things and as many ideas as they possibly can, which was really inspiring and exciting. So, everyone that was in a group, I'm sure, generated hundreds and hundreds of ideas. We did the same thing, and we were focused on three main questions. The first was, how might we use artists and cultural activity to revitalize communities? The next was, how might we ensure access to a creative life to every Pittsburgher? And finally, we looked at how might we use arts and cultural programs to address inequalities. And we really did have hundreds of ideas, and it was really difficult to narrow this down. But we had four big buckets that we saw rising to the top of ideas that we thought were really important. The first was this notion of having an appointed person, whether it was a government person or whether it was an identified community person, who could take the lead on community arts in the city. And so this card was emblematic, this notion of a minister of the arts for Pittsburgh. The next idea was to make very clear cultural spaces available in every neighborhood to be doing the types of things that our artists talked about, providing spaces for artists, making sure that artists know about these spaces and have the resources to work in these open spaces. Next was the notion of really enforcing the 1% art and development projects. This came up on a lot of note cards and was really, really important to our creative community. And lastly, we had a lot of conversation around public school programming for the arts and how important it is to make sure that arts are a part of the public school programs and making sure that artists have a place in public schools and are able to get into public schools. And that was our session.